So, hey everybody, this is our kind of second meeting with the Interchain Community Currency kind of task force or working group. The first one was kind of just some brief introductions. And the impetus behind this was that the Interchain kind of community with kind of Ethan Buckman and Sean and Gregory from Regen, all wanted to sort of have a working group around community currencies and kind of make that a serious focus for the Interchain Foundation. And they asked me to do some moderating around this, and I said yes. And so kind of, broad stroke, what I'd like to do today is kind of do some brief introductions, talk about some potential focus groups, and sort of filter people into a Discord channel where we'll have some sub channels as well, and also kind of start something like a stewardship group that looks into things like certificates for people's efforts, and then also give people a chance to talk about various applications and focuses that we can kind of all get together and work around. So let me start by doing some real brief out of some of just the few people here. I think we've got a little bit too many to introduce everyone. So what it would be nice is if people could sort of write a little bit, like one sentence about themselves on the chat. And in the meantime, I'll just kind of point to a few people to give a bit of an introduction about themselves and their background around community currency. And let's try to limit that to maybe 2-3 minutes. And so if I can just do that, I'm going to start with Sean as kind of the convener here as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Will. So, the context for this is that we've launched an Interchain program for Cosmos and beyond to focus on building out a sustainable and regenerative digital finance ecosystem, and looking at this from a number of different sort of angles, from research and development, engineering, advocacy, and use cases. So to really say, the time is now for us to have an ecosystem mission that is driven towards what we believe these technologies can do. And so a big focus area within this mission is community currencies, and that's why we're here. So this is a commitment that ICF has made for the next few years, and there's a program team, and there's a lot that's going to happen around this in terms of communications and work that will be done as a result of the efforts of a much broader community and sort of bringing people together and convening in this way. So super happy to have got to this point, and I'm looking forward to where we go from here.
Awesome. I know that Adam's not going to be on for very long, so I don't know if Adam, if your connection's good enough to give a few words from Red Cross.
Yeah, sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, you're okay now. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for inviting me. This is super exciting. Will and I have been working together for a couple of years now, and at the Red Cross, I look after a group of people that focus on innovative financing and systems change. And essentially kind of like what we're doing is trying to bridge end-to-end points from, local engagement to private sector financing, and how to do that with technology. At the same time, letting the communities on the ground have more agency and build resiliency. So it's great to be part of this, and thanks for organizing it.
Thanks, man. I see Aaron on here. Aaron, would you give a few words about kind of your working group that you're working with right now? Aaron Grover, yeah.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for welcoming me and my team from Digital RFQ out of London. Pretty much, I have a crypto background of 5 years, and I worked in places like Afghanistan, Nepal, East Timor for 10 years. But I am really focused in international payments and how to seamlessly convert from crypto to fiat or vice versa, whatever pairing internationally. And luckily I'm with this amazing group, Digital RFQ out of London, that specializes in just this. So there's a lot of possibility. I'm very passionate at the moment, and that's how I met Will.
Awesome, thanks, Erin. I don't, is Grace here? Grace Ruckmani? You're muted if you're trying to talk. I can come back to you. I kind of want to focus on. Oh, there you are. Yeah, go for it, Grace. You were there for a second.
Yes. Sorry, I'm driving and I have to have the person next to me unmute me. So
the person next to me is my kid.
That's my son, and he's
just a person to me though.
He's just a person, a person that I made. Yeah, so I've been working on this idea of reputation with communities. It's both part of the governance, because I'm working in the area more of DAO and governance. And so I'm working with communities, eco-villages here in Europe, and really looking at the sort of eco-village to eco-village rather than the individual to individual type of currency. So that's what I've been working on.
Sure. Thanks, Grace. Dill, are you here? Can you give talk a little bit about your work with Credit Commons and all the stuff you do?
Okay, hi. Working with Matthew Slater, Credit Commons protocol, which is sort of, I think, quite parallel in a way to this. Only it's not a blockchain thing, but it's a way of connecting all sorts of economic actors together in a fairly lightweight, robust way. I'm part of a sort of wider collaborative in the UK that is trying to build models that make all of this sort of community currency, new technology, different ways of doing things really easy to adopt by people who don't care about monetary theory or changing the world, but are in trouble with the horrible finance system. And I'm here really just to learn and listen. But thanks for letting me introduce myself.
Awesome.
Nice to be on the call. Cheers.
Good to have you here, Dill. I see Scott Morris on here. Would you say, Scott, a little bit about your background?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm presently in South France, but have been based in upstate New York in Ithaca, where I took over the charge of the Ithaca Hours, tried to help reorganize that network. And I've been in the currency space since 2008, 2009, and have been focused in crypto. I don't know, kind of having an integrative model and looking at like Grace phrased it, at DAOs and governance. But really, how do we deliver a financial system that's capable of, saving the world, meet the global goals, etc. So here in South France with some colleagues, and happy to be here. Thanks, Will.
Awesome. I see Mary Leaf here as well. I don't think we've gotten to talk with her yet.
Yep. Hi, I'm Marie Leaf. I'm working with Ethan Buckman at Informal to help shepherd the Cosmos SDK and the technical requirements to help support local currencies. I have a background in institutional finance and banking software development at large systems integrators, but I've been involved in the crypto ecosystem for about 6 years now. And my main goal is to focus on how we really, promote local currencies and resilience without recreating all the bad stuff that happened with the intense globalization of money. But yeah, I'm excited to meet with all of you guys and hear how you're developing.
Awesome, thanks. I'm going to call in just one more person, and then what I'd like to do is kind of go through a few agenda items, and then we can, seeing how much time we have left, we can do some more introductions and just general chat, if that's okay. So as just a last person, I'd like to call in Gustav Fries, because I haven't heard from him.
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm just a grassroots economic supporter. Last year, helped a bit with the Community Currency Alliance podcast series, and right now I work at the NEAR protocol. So very interested in this working group. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to post a few things in the chat here in terms of thinking about sort of like coordinating this stuff, and then we've got a few kind of like little polls to do. in terms of just kind of like looking at what are the sort of thematic issues that need to be tackled. And so first I'm gonna stick the I'm going to stick the Discord chat in here. We don't have to go to it now, but just so you have it in terms of, you know, future, you know, where we're going to filter people out into different sort of groups working on different things. So here it is. And then in general, I just kind of want to go through, I'm going to share screen here and go through this Miro board just real quickly to talk about some of these kind of thematic areas. And let me figure out how to use my computer here. There we go. So that's the Discord chat. And then there's a Miro board that I'm going to just share right here as well. There we go. And here we go, share screen. Okay. So some of you might be able to see this and others not, but this is kind of just a mind map that we kind of started on last time. And I wouldn't call it clean at this point or anything, but I just want to sort of talk about the space a little bit. And then we can do a little poll in terms of like, what are some of the sections that are missing here, or what are sections that you would like to kind of take part in. And so I'm going to start at the top here in terms of, you know, we have sort of policy and education. Some of these things might need to be moved around into other categories, but we have things like problem statements, like who is interested in doing these types of projects, like, you know, who wants to create a community currency, who needs them, what are they for, and just sort of in that realm of things, kind of give you a few ideas in terms of, you know, what. Let me kill my Discord here. You know, what are some of the applications that we've kind of been looking at on sort of a scaling platform? So we're working a lot with the humanitarian sector, and I would say grassroots economics, and I want to get into some of the other guys that are here as well. I think there's like Tat Lam and Chris that are working in Hong Kong. There's Giuseppe that's working in Sardex in Italy, and we've got a few of some old timers here like Scott and Dill Green that's been working with Matthew Slater. So there's a lot of sort of existing initiatives. There's a lot of exciting stuff going around in terms of business networks creating vouchers against their future production. There we go. There are municipalities that are looking at these types of things as a way of doing taxation, for instance. We've been really pushing a lot of that in Kenya, using things like Demarage. I'm just giving some broad sweeps here. There's community groups like you know, working in churches and faith-based organizations that want to create things like time banks and you know, support community services. And then there's a whole lots of different, you know, types here. So like time banks, mutual credits, incentive schemes, reserved back tokens, reputation-based tokens. You know, yield farming and outcome farming, producer credits, rewards. So there's a lot of different sort of typologies here. There's a lot to sort of understand around the space. So that's why I kind of stuck it here into policy and education, getting down into concepts like Demarage, like how to tax certain systems, how to reduce hoarding, for instance, if you want it to be more of a medium of exchange. Liquidity pools in terms of like connecting currencies together, verified states, or even like impact claims, tokenized outcomes, fractional reserve. There's a lot of pressure right now in terms of legitimizing the concept of decentralizing credit issuance. And that it's coming from a lot of points where we have things like Bitcoin being pushed into Ecuador and being accepted as taxation, and that being considered by some, you know, something like a colonial type push. And how do we encourage a state like Ecuador or municipalities to create their own tokens? How do we legitimize that space? So, you know, getting into regulation, research helps a lot. I mean, we're working with researchers kind of all year, every year, you know, different groups in terms of doing things like randomized control trials. all of that stuff is really interesting. And, you know, some of the stuff that we're doing as grassroots economics, you know, it's just one of many, many groups that are doing a lot of work in this space. That's really inspiring, and a lot of people just don't even know about it. And then sort of getting down into, so that's kind of like policy and education, very broad scope right there. You know, we can if we're thinking of this as a thematic working group, there can be lots of other kind of spin-off groups and things like this. And there's a lot of people that are sort of focused on regulatory environments, for instance. Like I know Aaron, who talked earlier here, is working with a registered securities exchange out of London, for instance, right? So, you know, what are those? What are the players in this space that we can work with that understand the application and can help us on the regulatory issues, or help us even get prepared on the regulatory issues once or if there's sort of, you know, the hammers kind of, you know, thrown at us. So in engineering, I think, you know, there's a lot of, I mean, this having started from the Cosmos kind of ecosystem, there's a big focus on tech here and decentralized tech and peer-to-peer kind of technology. So, I mean, what we've done in Kenya, and the reason we've used blockchain as a back end is because we wanted to make sure that whatever interface people were using, that didn't lock them into a system, right? So that they would have a decentralized layer of accounts and data such that they could use many different interfaces on that, right? That was kind of the dream around it. And to say like, no one should own the basic accounts that people have, no matter what interface you're using. So if you're, you know, back in the day, we've had like cyclos.org was one of the main interfaces, still is for a lot of community currencies, but it locks you into their Postgres database, right? Which you can't really get out of, and you can't exchange between currencies. And, you know, it's really, you know, it's 90s kind of tech. And it locked people into this thing. So the dream of blockchain for us was around connectivity. And what's nice about the Cosmos ecosystem is that there's some protocols connecting ledgers together by default, sort of, you know, intrinsic connections if they're being implemented by a ledger system. And it's also very open to different consensus algorithms. There doesn't have to be one particular. It could be proof of stake. It could be all kinds of sort of, you know, database-esque schemes that, as long as there's some sort of signing ability. But I'm not the expert on that. I'll let Sean and some of the others kind of get into that. But there's a lot of stuff around tooling and user requirements that essentially, if you imagine the state at which a village can create a token against their goods and services, well, what does that look like? What is the process for them to create that token? But let's say they've done it, and there's many such tokens. There's you know, government level tokens. There's you know, business network tokens. There's church group tokens. Imagine this multi-token state, and how do people deal with that token state? To deal with, you know, what do those wallets look like? So there's a lot of, what we've done so far is very simple little wallets, right? Like just like USSD kind of, you know, text-based wallets. So getting into the state where we have multi-token wallets where we can deal with, you know, UNICEF wants to create a token, you know, how do we, you know, that's redeemable as a reward, for instance. How do we deal with that? How do we make it so that users can use all that stuff? So for us, we're sort of at zero on that. And so it's like and there's so many people even on this call that have built wallets, for instance, or are using different wallets and things like that. So excited about that. You know, governance, again, like, you know, how are tokens created? You know, what legitimizes them? And that's a huge thing with community currency that, you know, a lot of the crypto space is sort of glossed over, you know, where you've created a token maybe against the gas fee on your blockchain, and that's it, that's the backing for it. But we actually are talking much more about, you know, claims against production in the future, or, you know, trusted systems within communities. And so trust and, you know, backing becomes super important in this space, and some mechanisms for assessment of that is super important. And I love what Dill and Matthew Slater are doing around the Credit Commons protocol, because to me there's a big chunk there that is saying, how do we actually validate this credit versus that credit. You know, how would we determine that? How would we create exchanges between them? You know, with good evidence. So, in terms of the interchain enablers, I'm not gonna go into this. There's a lot to go into there. There's a lot of, I mean, Cosmos has built an SDK and modules that do a lot of really cool stuff already. So, you know, things like having a token or a demurrage contract. And I know, like Mary was saying, that there's already something there for like IOUs and stuff like that. So like these sort of primitives, and there's like decentralized exchanges and stuff like that that have been integrated. At least on the blockchain level, like IXO has done things like bonding curves as well. So if you want to have a currency that's backed not just by production, but also with some collateral behind it of another type of asset, that's possible. So building, you know, this group of modules and SDKs that relate to community currencies is a big thing, you know, including wallets and all kinds of stuff. So this is sort of a really exciting to be in this space around the tech. And then I'm going to zoom out here into kind of, I'll sort of stop it here, but yeah, use cases and applications. I kind of started with this, but and there's so much more to add here. And guys, if you want to add to this, I'll give you just ping me on the Discord channel. I'm Baba Nia, which is Nia's my daughter's name, so Baba is the father of Nia. That's what people call me here in Kenya. So just ping me at Baba Nia on the Discord channel, and after this, and we can go through this. But I'll just mention a few of these that are sort of exciting right now. So regenerative agriculture. So like, you know, using a credit against the future production or value of land to pay for all the labor needed to do massive regenerative agriculture. It's a huge use case. It's massive. And, you know, tying that into carbon credits, you know, with regen and those kinds of things, there's a lot of really, really cool stuff there. That's I think probably, I've kind of gone at the top here just because it's such an important thing that we need to do right now in terms of, even just dealing with, climate crisis, but also, failing food systems, and just, regenerating soil and whatnot. Municipal currencies and taxation. To me, this is sort of like the founding use case for a lot of great old systems. Like if you might have heard of Wargol or Curitiba, these are like, in the 30s and 40s now, sort of ancient systems, but they sort of set a precedent and really taught a lot of people about these things, and came from thinkers like Gesell and that introduced demurrage and things like this. And there are municipalities that are really loving and trying to integrate these things, like Bristol Pound maybe is a good example now, and maybe not, but still, like that, I still sort of, regardless of whether or not we have municipalities right now, and I think within the next year in Kenya, we're going to have lots of them as we work with the Red Cross and other organizations. They have to work with the local government, right? And there's governments that really do want these types of things. They want credit against their future production. They want to be able to tax the informal sector and reuse that again on social services. So there's a nice interplay there that I think if we take this as a standard, we say, look, we want to be legitimate enough that a municipality could adopt these programs legally, with policies, with all the documentation, with, I think that's a nice standard to always be going for, because that's also, keeps us out of jail and in that sense, right? Like we're always trying to maintain a higher standard than exists in the world right now. So I think that's a nice aspect. Basic income again. You want to say something?
If anyone is well motivated, right, to have a package that keeps us out of jail, it's you, buddy.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we've won some court cases and we were put in jail, but it like in the end, everything was above the table, such that it was very hard to say, a nonprofit foundation like us, to stop someone from trading tomatoes for school fees, right? Who's been hurt by this sort of thing. So I think that's really important to talk about that space. And it's not that people can't be hurt by these systems too. So it is important to think a lot through those kind of policy stuff. So basic income. Yeah.
I just my question was just to quickly zoom out and check, and sorry if I missed this, but I'm looking for the primary question that we're seeking to answer. Is that, so we have Interchain Foundation, which as I'm understanding is a part of the Cosmos realms. Is that true?
Let me just finish this one little piece here, and then
Okay.
we'll
All right. Sorry,
we'll
bro.
get
You
to
got
more
the floor.
discussion and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay.
So just in terms of basic income, it's something that is really popular nowadays. You hear it a lot, and it's another thing that's very possible to design, right? You know, it could be based on a demurrage, it could be reintroduced to a community. So I think this kind of municipal aspect around this is really powerful. You know, humanitarian aid, you know, we're like Adam, who was just on the call here, you know, the idea of cash for asset programs or cash and voucher assistance, they fit almost perfectly into the development of community currencies, right? Where the asset in this case could be a cooperative, or the market itself can be a soft asset that is the backing or utilizing a community currency. This gives humanitarian aid a huge amount of data for impact claims and things like this. This has been a huge door opener, and this also opens the door toward a lot of municipal currencies because they're super integrated. Cooperatives themselves, you know, business vouchers, faith-based organizations, demonstration sites sneaked in here, adjacency value like impact claims, or digital identity. Let me start with there. The idea that identity is not a static construct, that KYC is, you know, as a one-time event to say Scott Morris is Scott Morris is kind of ridiculous. The idea that identity is a continuous thing is really powerful, and that, you know, endorsements and transactions are things that actually promote the acknowledgement that Scott is Scott, for instance. So there's a lot of adjacency value around currency data, and getting into sort of self-sovereign data, right? Like, can I own my transaction data? Can I use that as a zero knowledge proof? Can I prove that I am myself, or that I sell water, or that I, you know, have endorsements against that water? So there's a lot of really powerful stuff around currency that, as it gets into marketplaces and impact claims or claims against, you know, what you sell, and incentives and rewards. And I'm not going to get too much. There's a lot of like different networks and things like that we were trying to map out here, different blockchains like Cosmos. So Interchain Foundation is the foundation that sort of started Cosmos. And there's sort of the Cosmos Hub is the blockchain that sort of does the automated sort of bridging between all the chains on Cosmos. If I've got that right, someone can but any chain can potentially also implement this protocol to connect to each other as well. So we can have, you know, there can be connections between all these other chains as well. And there already have been a lot of bridges made, like between Bitcoin and Ethereum and Cosmos and things like this. So that's kind of the goal, is just, you know, like create protocols that connect different blockchains together, and then add modules and things like that on top of that. So yeah, I'm gonna stop there, and maybe what we can do is, I was going to put a poll up with just, you know, what are your interests in terms of these areas, these thematic areas. Yeah, I think there's a poll. It should have popped up on you right now. And then there's actually two polls. So we can actually do both of them. There's also the question of, you know, what sort of governance and coordination mechanisms should we implement as a group here? And then feel free to add other stuff in the chat too, if none of these are sort of applicable. And I think you can do multiple choice as well. So this is just a way of sort of like filtering a little bit. And then on that Discord group after this, we're gonna have you guys kind of filter into eventually, like, you know, different sort of rooms or channels for these different, you know, kind of topics. And then finally on the reputation stuff, while this poll is up here, the idea that there can be some kind of reputation or contribution tokens that are given out, sort of like certificates against doing some of the work that needs to be done on some of these issues. As a sort of MVP is what I've been thinking of, but there can also be lots of different sort of governance mechanisms around this stuff. And you know, maybe Sean can also mention, I'll give him a second here to talk a little bit around you know, the Interchain Foundation and IXO, and sort of the role in terms of sort of like managing resources around this kind of stuff. And I know that there's a lot of people, like even Red Cross, that have resources or potential grants and things like this, or are looking at grants to do certain things, and looking at, you know, who in this space can do that kind of work or is interested in it, or has some reputation in this space too. So maybe I'll leave it over to Scott. To Sean for a second here.
Yeah, so I think there's the opportunity in this space is, on the one hand, kind of resourcing the work and creating more inclusive mechanisms, more better coordination and engagement mechanisms, for instance, using DAO type funding, and we'll be putting out some information about that type of funding and providing an opportunity for people to participate in that. The other side of it is how we form consensus around things such as the rubrics and the definitions. So we spoke about this a bit on the last call about how people use different terminology for different types of community currencies, and even what do we mean by community currencies, what do we mean by mutual credit, etc. And so we feel that this can be quite a powerful contribution if we're able to get consensus and have a smooth process around how we can create these rubrics and define things, create the terminology, the ontologies that enable us to all do this work in ways that we're all talking about the same thing when we're referring to these many different concepts, and many of them are new or they're applied in different ways. So we really have a blank canvas in terms of what we can do through this working group and through the program. A big part of it is focused on engineering, but in order to engineer the systems, we need to understand what are the user requirements and what are the concepts that we're trying to implement, and then how do we measure against the outcomes and the results of these systems to ensure that they take us in the right direction, and that we can pick up faults in the system or issues and new requirements as we go along. So because it's such a broad landscape to cover, we've got these thematic areas around stewardship and around engineering and around research and development, policies and use cases, which gives people an entry point. And then through those discussions within those sort of subtopic areas, we hope to facilitate some consensus around what are the important things that can be tackled within the context of this working group and in the context of the broader program, really bringing a lot of contribution mechanisms to play here, and also having the resources to be able to do practical work and implementations and gather the results from that.
Cool.
Back to you, Will.
Cool, thanks, man. The last thing is sort of on the agenda before we just get into some general discussion, and is for people to mention kind of who's missing and who needs to be sort of part of these discussions. And Jessica also just mentioned on the chat, sort of consent versus consensus, and in the decision space, so what decisions require consent, what's the map for the decision space really look like what kind of decisions are we trying to make here, and so my thinking around that was to sort of form sort of a stewardship group, starting with that Discord, around sort of mapping out that space. But that's a good thing to discuss as well. But so as a last sort of discussion item, who should be in this space was something that we'd like you to sort of mention in the chat, and that we can maybe invite them to the next meeting. So if you've got emails or names and emails or people that you can invite into the space, I think that would be really good. So I'll give you guys a minute to do that, and then just kind of open up the floor to some discussion. And then, yeah, the plan for communication around this stuff is, through that Discord channel, through emails. We're going to have kind of this type of high level meeting for the next 2 weeks, I believe. So something like this for the next 2 weeks. We may start getting into more, what's actually been, if there's any exciting news and things people add to it. And then by the end of those 3 weeks, kind of have stewardship group and a path forward towards, you know, working on some of these concepts, and like Sean was talking about, like how do we have a common language about a lot of these things and kind of common directionality. So I'm just gonna leave it. I'm just gonna open it up here for questions, and we've got sort of 20 minutes to just kind of discuss various topics.
I just want to circle back on my earlier question then. So it sounds like what's happened here is the Interchain Foundation has expressed interest in this working group, you know, for informing its future work on the Cosmos SDK, you know, and as may benefit others and all in the Cosmos ecosystem. That's cool. That's great. And it seems like the thing that we're contemplating here is like, all right, great. We're a bunch of community currency people to one degree or another. How do we want to go about organizing ourselves to that effect? Right. Is that the general challenge here?
I can answer that a little bit, and then I'll hand it over. But I also noting on the chat here this kind of, you know, that the current decentralized or data centers and whatnot aren't sort of up to the task around this. And so I think Sean mentioned this as well. It's like we're not trying to peg everyone into blockchain or a specific protocol or Cosmos itself. Ideally, like a lot of the protocols and you know, systems that we're trying to set up can work, you know, with paper and vouchers even, right? Like that's, you know, I would hope that we can get to that for a lot of these things. We don't necessarily need one type of tech at all. But at the same time, there's a lot of like just practical proof of concepts that need to be created and need to be used, even using whatever we can use, you know, sticks and bubble gum even kind of thing. So maybe Sean or someone else can
yeah, I'd be keen. Ethan is on the call as well, so I'd invite him to make a comment. But so the Interchain Foundation was primarily created out of the Cosmos ecosystem, but has taken on a number of R&D initiatives, including the Inter-Blockchain Communication Protocol, which I think is a good example of kind of going beyond a specific blockchain and really looking at what kind of protocols are needed in an interchain world to enable the interoperability and the utility of these networks. And then it goes beyond just having connected blockchains and having an internet of blockchains. This needs to have some purpose. And so we see the purpose of interconnected blockchains as being really suited to sustainability and regenerative finance. And within that, community currencies and local currency systems really have a big role to play. And so from the Interchain Foundation perspective, this is really about a chain agnostic, really protocol driven and supportive function. How do we build out ecosystems around these technologies and start to really move also the technologies from being focused on just building software to real world use cases? So how do we bridge between the engineering requirements of blockchains and the applications related to them into real world use cases and the application of these technologies within the real world? Ethan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, that was well said. Just for context, I'm the president of the Interchain Foundation. So the ICF was started initially to support Cosmos, but the sort of core values of Cosmos have always been sovereignty and interoperability. So the idea that this technology we're building, it should be available for any community to be able to use on their own terms, and that each sovereign community, despite their sovereignty, should still be interoperable with other sovereign communities. And so those two values kind of underlie all the technology we're building, and the Cosmos SDK and IBC and all these protocols sort of reflect that. But we've also felt that, you know, out of those values emerge a kind of philosophy of localism. And we've also felt that the ultimate goal or purpose or use case of the blockchain tech is to support a localism grounded in a sort of, you know, new monetary system based on local monies, and a way of stitching local monies together potentially into, say, a hierarchy or you know, some yet to be determined structure that maybe a group like this will play some role in figuring out. So the ICF has been now explicitly also trying to push back somewhat against all the, right now blockchains and crypto are mostly being used for DeFi and speculation and casinos. And we're trying to push back a little bit and say, okay, how can we actually go to, real communities and use this for real world support of, exchange functionality, not exchanging cryptocurrencies, but real production, as sort of Will's been putting it. Yeah.
There's a few comments here in the chat that are really good as well. Like, are we putting the cart before the horse? We're building, ecosystems out of technologies rather than the other way around. By looking at ecosystems or building ecosystems and saying what technologies can support them. Like, I think that's really, an apt term. I think, in terms of the actual need for a municipality, a very specific use case where there is a community or there is a village that needs to do X, Y, and Z, and to say, okay, how can they organize themselves? Is there some sort of system approach for them to do X, Y, and Z, right? Is that if that is organizing labor forces to do X amount of work in exchange for goods and services of others. Oh yeah, I'm gonna stop sharing their things. What are those systems that those guys need? And so I think coming from the point of use cases is really powerful. And to me, this is like why I've moved to Kenya for 13 years was just to be able to be around places where there just was not currency, right? Where currency seeps out of the system really fast all the time, right? There's a chronic lack of it. So just being able to see really concrete use cases has been a way that I can say, okay, here's where this type of currency, and we've probably tried a dozen by now of different modalities of issuance models, different technologies from paper to ledger books to databases to blockchain and different interfaces to see what worked in different contexts. So my hope is that a lot of like some of these tracks, some of like for instance like Dill can be looking at things like what are the real fundamental needs and systems that need to be there, and then there can be lots of different engineers and tech groups and organizations that can say, oh well, we can do that. We can create a version of that, and maybe it won't be the right one or the perfect one, but like so to like give people different applications and basic principles and say, hey, can this be built? And I feel like right now what's exciting is there's so much tech out there. I mean, within Cosmos, but outside of Cosmos in terms of like governance models and DAOs and voting systems and whatnot, that a lot of this is just integration work, and it needs to be integrated in a way where like Aaron, who runs works with a security trading organization, can say, oh yeah, okay, we can use that piece within what we're doing here right now, and so to me, I just want to connect together a lot of these kind of the thinkers and the applications into the the engineers and the doers, and kind of merge that together into working spaces. So I actually, Grace, I hear, has been holding up her hand. So would you please go ahead, Grace?
Yes, I mean, this is a really exciting working group, and and it's really an impressive group of people who are all working in the field, and so it's really amazing. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the DAO stuff because Sean was talking about Dow Based Funding, and I think there's two things to acknowledge in that area. One is that everybody in this group has a conflict of interest. And this is generally known as bad governance, right? A group of people who are deciding to allocate money to themselves is generally known as bad governance. And so we need to be aware of that. Otherwise, we end up being a group where we're kind of conflicting with each other because, there's a certain amount of money and a certain amount of jobs and a certain amount of community currencies. So again, we all have working relationships with one another in a certain way, and I don't want this to end up to be like we're all competing with each other for money, or like William and I, oh, we're the grassroots economics people, let's bring more people of our people into the working group to swing the vote, right? So we need to be very careful when we talk about DAO-based funding. What I think is a really useful way to use the DAO is to determine this roadmap, because both, a couple of you were just saying, okay, we want to use cases first and not just end up developing a lot of technology without the communities. And I think that the Dow-based governance, or I mean, you could call it consensus, or it could be with voting, without voting. I think the really important area is really defining the problem and defining the roadmap and the qualifications of, okay, what would answer, you know, the first 3 months, what would get us to the milestone? And then rather than having to decide on the funding and then getting, you know, whoever gets voted in, rather say, oh, here are the criteria, who meets the criteria the best? And I think that's a better way of looking at the Dow-based funding, is setting up criteria and priorities, and then having whatever it is, an automated or less automated process that matches the needs that as a group we've decided as a Dow, these are the needs, and then the funding follows what we determine as the needs, rather than sort of a political process. So I think there's a real, you know, real need to take a look at what do we want to use the Dow for that doesn't end up with people having conflicts of interest. Because I don't, you know, fundamentally we all want the same thing, and we're all working on the same solution set, and we all want to stay friends. And, you know, it's because it's not about making money. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing would be, okay, as we're forming the working groups, if the working groups are going to do work, then we may need to decide, how do you pre-fund that? Because otherwise you also get this imbalance of people who are on the working groups that maybe this is part of their day job, and people who are on the working groups as volunteers. And then you also end up with this corruption around who has the time to invest in it. So I just think we need to talk about, especially because we're talking about money, we need to talk about money. And, you know, those are where conflicts of interest lie. And I think there's a tremendous potential here to create an amazing collaborative effort, but there's also this potential for corruption. And so I think we need to just put it on the table. That's it.
Thanks, Grace. Does anyone want to speak to that in terms of, you know, like organizing funding and whatnot for working groups and things like that?
I just wanted to, yeah, I don't know if you saw in the chat, probably did, about asking about what is the focus of the group and just finding that common ground and then writing that down, because sometimes language and words are also limited, and making sure we have the same understanding. So I guess I'm just checking my assumptions in what the intention of this group is. And I think that for me is maybe the most important clarity. And as mentioned in the chat, maybe it's exploratory, maybe it's not focused on an output, maybe it's more about a process than a destination. And I think also understanding, this is one of the main areas of conflict that came up in building the token engineering commons. Some people are like, this is the process, and the process is a process, and don't change the process. And others are more focused on like the goal that we achieve, and the process can be changed. And there's also this frequency domain issue that comes up in governance. So I guess, yeah, the clear intention of kind of what we are aiming to do, and then just the comment as well as having worked for a year to birth the token engineering commons, DAOs have so much overhead. And I know we have some wizards here, but there may be a simpler model to go from like a basic multi-sig with a board. I think a lot of DAOs are like throwing all structure out the window without having any institutional design or anything to take its place. And there's a reason that boards and nonprofits have worked for, you know, a really long time. So I think too, we could take some kind of a little more centralized or traditional structure as a start in having a representation of various groups. But yeah, I think clarity around intention and the ground is maybe a good place. So that's a statement and some questions in there to understand like what is the ground and the conditions that we want to set. And then yeah, it can be very emergent as well, but some kind of purpose or intention and understanding.
Yeah, I kind of throw out mine there. I mean, I've spoke a lot, but the idea that you know, I'm coming from the point of view of the sort of the humanitarian space and the, you know, kind of as much radical transparency as we can get in terms of these are the problems that we're facing on the ground, and they need to have some solutions. So I kind of see it as like, if there's people asking for help in certain ways, and there's other people that are willing to support on those issues, in terms of policy and research and tech. I think that's where I come into this space, is just saying, look, we've got issues. We do have some developers at Grassroots Economics that are awesome, but we're not going to solve all these problems, nor are we going to solve the problems on policy and all this stuff. We can try stuff, we can apply things. And so that's kind of, just in terms of free sharing of information around this stuff and sort of coordination around people who are interested in common things. To me, that's sort of the common denominator for me in terms of being here. But Grace is right. There's a lot of, like Grassroots Economics, and there's a lot of different groups that would love to get funding for certain things as well. So it would be nice if there was kind of a clear break between sort of like, is this an open sharing thing, or are we competing for funding pools and things like that?
At the beginning of the pandemic, 3 of us had launched a thing called the Open Credit Network, and I already knew it wasn't going to work. And I pulled together a group a bit like this. And what we did there in this exactly this sort of why are we here, whatever, is, and it sounds like you're sort of doing it already, having this idea of regular calls for a little while, is we just broke it down into stages. We said, like, the first stage was literally 2 calls. It was just, does anybody think there's a value in talking about this stuff? The next stage was, do we think we have a job to do? And in that case, it was, can we identify routes to market for these ideas? And as soon as that was finished, that was the end of that stage. And then, so that you actually, you can do this purpose stuff, but you're not having to write some sort of grand overarching purpose that will sustain you for 15 years like a charity might have to do. You're just saying, okay, there's these people, we've turned up, here we are. We're obviously capable of having very interesting conversations. There's lots of great people here. We don't have to agree to work together for 2 years, on some big thing. But we do seem to want to be here now. And so we can just, and what that does, it sort of builds trust and avoids conflict of interest. And then you can say, okay, right, what would the next stage look like? Who wants to be part of that? And you can sort of agree informally a couple of things. We kept records of hours that people contributed without, I called them bullshit tokens out loud. I sort of said, these may or may not ever turn into anything, but we're recording them because, we care that people turned up. And then the other thing is, we had an informal agreement that all the IP generated in the context of a particular stage would be freely available to all participants, but sort of stewarded by the next stage. So these are sort of very, very simple agreements that almost you didn't even need to write down. You could just sort of do it by Sociocratic, has anyone got a problem with that, and talk them through, and then they're just in the notes of the meeting and you move on. But that's just the way we did it. I'm not making even proposals, just offering that into the space.
Yeah, thanks, Dill. I like that approach. I like the idea of just, we're here to share, at least for these next 3 or 2 more sessions after this. And then there's a Discord channel with some sub channels on it as well. There'll be one around sort of stewardship as well. And so, to my thinking was, by the 3rd of these talks, we'll have come up with some kind of problem statement and purpose statement around, do we want to continue this? What's the next stage? I like that framing of it. Thank you. And on our side, like, open source and, the idea of having contribution tokens, those are all things that I think are, a beautiful way to show appreciation to people and whatnot, and kind of try to steer clear of long-term funding commitments and DAOs and things like that, at least for now. I think that's a prudent thing to do. Thank you. And I noticed we've got 7 minutes left on the call. I'm gonna maybe ping it back to Sean to see if there's, and then maybe some very AOBs or anything like that.
Yeah, from my side, I guess, I want to just contextualize this as being part of a broader program, which will also have be putting in place some mechanisms for communication and importantly, connecting different areas of work. So for instance, as Will mentioned around digital identity, we have a work stream around digital identity as well. So being able to really connect these different concepts at the layers of use cases and then going through to engineering and then further research and development. And then there'll also be systematic mechanisms around being able to facilitate decision processes. And I think this has been something that that the Cosmos open source development process has done quite well around the Cosmos SDK, is to be able to facilitate a process of making decisions, in this case about architectural decisions, using an open proposal and discussion set of mechanisms, and then mechanisms of creating consensus and formalizing the engineering implementations. So we can learn a lot from these systems that are already in place, and we will be supporting the work of this group and connecting it to the work of other groups within the broader program. So we're at the start of this journey. It's a commitment over multiple years, and so we're putting in place the foundations for this, which are part technology and systems, but a much bigger part about community and the people who come together to make this happen.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And the application side, again, like the needs of Scott, in Ithaca, for instance, and the needs of Dill, and that they've identified and mapped out a huge amount of this problem space for years already. It's super, super valuable. And even, like with the Red Cross and cash and voucher assistance, right? There's a lot of like really core problems that that we can map out as well and find solutions to. And I think we're in digitally, and I mean technically, I think there's a lot of really good intention and good hands around this space. I mean, to me, this is the most rich sort of distributed ledger kind of ecosystem that I've found so far. With IXO is doing a lot of this impact claim concepts, which are really powerful, including digital identity, and then Regen doing carbon credits and looking at the regenerative agriculture space. So there's a lot of tools that have been built that I think are very good tools, and so learning from these guys and playing around in this space, I think, is also really important, and starting to see what's possible and what can be done. And yeah, I'm going to read Santosh's last. I believe small wins are important to galvanize the group. Working on real world implementations can accelerate our learning as a group. Yeah, great to be here. Yeah, likewise. We literally have dozens of requests and groups around the world, not just Red Cross, but even World Food Program, but also just communities around the world that want to implement and want to try the concept. They want to work together. They want to share common risk and common success. So I think, if we can give them tools to do some of those things, they don't have to necessarily even be currency related so much. And like Grace has talked a bit about, of like consensus building tool sets. Sufficiency currency is her baby. So there's a lot of really cool concepts in this space to give people those tools. So I think there's a huge need out there. If we can identify those problems and those tools, we have, even just to pilot together with the humanitarian space, I think there's a huge openness to that, as long as we can mitigate risks and making sure that there's not going to be more suffering as a result. So small pilots, small wins, one municipality, one village, one refugee camp, and even into Europe and the US, like if we can get these things going there as well, I think that would be amazing. So yeah, happy to be here. Thanks everyone for coming. Feel free to come to the next one. I think we're probably going to sort of repeat a bit of this, and then again, come to the Discord channel to chat more about these things. And there's a video from the last call as well, which is mostly just a bunch of introductions. We didn't get too much into the stuff, but it was a good call actually. And so there's a video of that there too on the Discord channel, and also with that mind map as well. And I'm happy to give people edit access to that. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming.